Hi, I'm Peter Kavanagh. We're thinking about Mark's Gospel, chapter 4, the storm at sea, from verses 35 through to the end, and particularly trying to glean whatever wisdom we can from it in regards to the current coronavirus crisis that we're all having to face at different degrees of severity. One of the things about the story is that in the midst of their journey, as we've read, there's this incredible and terrible storm. Matthew's Gospel uses a slightly different word to that used in Mark and in Luke. Matthew describes it as, in simple language, an earthquake of the sea, as though trying to ensure that we understand the magnitude of this. And these Galilean fishermen, of course, they were used to this, and also they were also used to the fact that storms on the Sea of Galilee could occur. They weren't that uncommon. But yet this one just felt terrifying, because as we read in the story, they thought they were going to drown. How confusing for them, because they believed that they were traveling very much in the will of God and at the command of God, as we've thought about previously. But here's a thought. What a confusing time it was. Why were they in the storm, and what was the source of the storm's great power? These fishermen would have read, of course, the story of Jonah, where the source of the earthquake of the sea was none other than God himself, God's displeasure at the journey of Jonah. They also perhaps would have known the stories of Job, and how satanic powers were also able to manipulate nature and bring terror. Thus, Jesus, of course, rebukes the wind as though it were an enemy rather than an element of nature. And of course, they would also have been familiar with the idea that storms can just happen. Sometimes it's just bad weather. And so in this story, you have something of that. You have something of the mystery. What's really behind the storm? And of course, one of the issues facing Christians in this pandemic is this: what's the source? What's the reason for this terrible, dreadful virus? Some have thumbed into the pages of Revelation to say, well, this is God's voice, this is God's wrath, the beginning of the last days. Others have looked and thought, no, that maybe this is the work of the Prince of Darkness. Maybe these are satanic forces at work. And others have said, similarly, it's a plague. Jesus said there would be plagues and pestilence. And we understand that these things happen in a fallen world. And so it can be a confusing time. Another point of confusion in the story might be that we think to ourselves, well, doesn't God know about this? Like God's people are passing away. good and godly people are suffering terribly. The great God of all compassion would not do this. Where is he? And even the words, you see, of the disciples in verse 38 maybe strike a chord. Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Lord, why are you doing this? If you're a pastor and you have folks in your church that are unwell, Lord, why are you doing this? You've gathered people together in your family, in your church family or whatever, Zoom meetings and all kinds of things, to say, Lord, please, please, will you heal? And some have been healed and some have not. And some have begun new enterprises for the Lord, initiatives that now seem doomed to failure. There'll be no people, there'll be no income. But what we thought God had said, we say, Lord, don't you care that we perish? Confusing. And then on top of that, you've got the very idea that Jesus began the journey at the beginning of this passage. Let us go to the other side. And it seems like that's not what is going to happen. But I want to suggest this, that asking where has the virus come from, is it an angel or a demon, is it supernatural or natural, these are not the questions really to ask. We're asking the wrong questions. In fact, we're asking questions to which perhaps right now there just isn't an answer. Here's the question I think we should be asking. Who is in our boat? Some would say, well, it's such a dreadful time because we are sinking. How can God be with us? But here we find in the story that the ship was filling with water, and yet the Lord himself was in the ship with them. And so God and calamity can co-inhabit the same space. You can have the presence of God, the powerful, close presence of God, and disaster and fear, all in the same 2 meters. Someone once said on TV just recently about the pandemic, they said this: we're all in the same boat. Just a moment. No, we're not. We're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. And so here's the challenge to us. In our confusion, in our fear, in our I don't understand what's going on, here's the challenge. We must wake up the master that's in our own boat. The passage begins by saying, in verse 36, that there were other boats with them. Those other boats didn't have the answer. Those other boats didn't have Jesus of Nazareth asleep on a cushion below deck. But we do have Jesus of Nazareth on our ship, close to us. And when the disciples woke up Jesus, do you see? And when he stopped the storm, he didn't just save their boat, but he saved all the boats. So there's a challenge here. Our nation is in great peril, as are the nations of the world. But we can wake up the Master. I'm using that as a metaphor, of course, to mean to pray. Not to ask questions about, well, what's going on? No, the only question we need to ask is, who has the answer? Who can solve this? The Lord, strong and mighty. And you see, if we will wake up the Jesus in our boat, we won't just save ourselves, but we will save all the other boats.